What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of Monte Poker. Happy to have you as per usual. We have another action-packed episode for you this week, and one of the biggest blunders I think I've ever made. And we've punted a lot with Ace Jack. This episode is going to have 2 sessions in it. One of them was really short and didn't have too much, so I included it with this one. I'm also trying to catch up so the blog isn't so backdated. I'm going to attempt to catch up over the next month and a half. You guys might not see me on the felt for a while. All right, let's jump into it. All right, the first hand of interest brings us to a PLO Bomb Pot. We have Ace 4, 6, 7. The flop came out 8, 5, 9. For those of you that don't know, bomb pots basically mean everyone just puts in X amount of money and you go straight to the board. So there's no extra betting before the flop. Anyhow, we have a straight made on this board with our 6 and our 7. We have a straight from the 5 to the 9, which is currently the nuts. So I bet $20. We have one person behind us make the call. Another player ends up going all in for 40. Player after him decides to fold his hand. Margot is after that player, and she also decides to put in the $40 after she thinks about it for just a moment. This is exactly what I was hoping would happen. We have the nuts right now. Obviously, we have the best possible hand, but there's some other straight draws that can get there. Something like, 10 jack or 7-10 could potentially improve and have a higher straight. We're holding 2 clubs, so we have a flush draw, but I'm sure somebody has a better flush draw than a 6 high flush draw, so I really don't want to see any more clubs coming. When the action gets back to me, I max out this bomb pot at the cap, which is $90. I don't expect any of our opponents to fold, but I want to make sure to charge them the maximum to get there on us if they do. So after I cap it at 90, the opponent to my left calls, and then it gets it back over to Margot. She takes some time to think about it. She does not look pleased with the decision that she has in front of her. And I don't know how the heck she's going to fold here for another $40 into a pot that has already 350. It would make it 40 to make 400 almost, but she does ultimately end up folding. So we're going to this river 3 ways, praying for a clean run out. Our opponent to the left does show that he does have a 10 high flush draw with a gut shot straight draw needing a jack. I'm really hoping that the board doesn't pair because our opponent at the end hasn't shown his cards yet. And a 5 on the turn pairs the board, 10 of spades on the river. Our opponent at the end ends up showing his hand, and he was also on a draw and did not hit. So our straight is the best hand here somehow. Kind of surprising for a PLO pot, but you know what? I'm not going to complain about it. I have no problem scooping this $350 pot. About 40 minutes go by before we look down at 5-7 suited on the button. A player in middle position decides to raise it to 15, and I decide that 5-7 suited is good enough to see a flop with. 3 of us go into this board here with $49 in the middle, and the board comes out 8-6 king with 2 spades. We flop an open-ended straight draw. Any 4 or any 9 will give us the straight here. Our opponent ends up betting $15. I go ahead and decide to put in the call here. I'm sorry, it was $25, not $15. So $50 more in the middle. The turn is a 5 of diamonds. We improve to a pair, but I don't expect our pair to be good here. I think our opponent has at least a king here, potentially something better. He decides to bet out for $25 yet again. So we're gonna go ahead and put in the call. This is a fantastic price to hit our straight here. So going off to this river with 149 in the middle, the 4 of diamonds does peel off, so we end up hitting our straight. Unfortunately, a flush does get there, but I don't expect our opponent to have this flush very often because it went runner, diamonds. He checks it over to us. It seems like he's afraid of the diamond draw. Maybe he's putting us on the diamond draw. I do want to bet this, but I don't want to go too big. I want it to be small enough for him to have to call with this pair of kings. So we make it $65 to go here, and our opponent doesn't seem too thrilled about this spot that he's in. Some time goes by, and he does end up tanking for about a minute and a half before eventually going all in. This doesn't make too much sense to me. Our opponent is trying to represent a really strong hand. We're currently holding the straight, so I don't really put him on the straight. It's unlikely that he's holding a 7 or 7-10. It almost seems like he's trying to represent the flush, but he bet the flop, the turn, and then the river. He check raised all in. Oh man, I don't know what he has here. I'm not putting him on a set of kings or a set of 6s. It'd be suicidal to just jam for your entire stack with just a set when there's 4 cards to a straight and 3 cards to a flush. This is a really tough spot. This is very, very rarely a bluff, but I just cannot fathom our opponent going runner for a diamond here, and he bet all 3 streets. I guess he did bet small enough that he may have been taking a stab at the flop. you know, bet the turn because he picked up equity and then just got there on the river. Either way, it's only $91 more for me to put in the call, so I don't think I can fold it for this amount with the straight. So I do go ahead and put in the call, and we get shown the bad news. Our opponent flopped top pair with a deuce kicker, turned a flush draw, and absolutely got there to crush our soul on the river. Jump into our next session from about a week later. We look down at 2-3 of hearts in the small blind with 450 in our stack. This isn't usually a hand we like to call a raise with pre-flop from this position, but you know, sometimes you got to play some weird cards. You know, you can't just always play the best cards, otherwise you will be very predictable. The board comes out 4-9-5 with 2 diamonds, so similar to the last hand we played, we have an open-ended straight draw. Our opponent bets $15. The second player in the hand calls the $15, so we are very priced in to see one more card. The turn comes a 4 of diamonds. Now this is concerning because 3 diamonds got there, and the only other draw besides our straight draw is the flush draw. So it's very possible our opponents have it, but I'm gonna go ahead and just donk bet here for $35. Trying to represent the flush here. Unfortunately, our opponent doesn't seem to want to give up just quite yet. She puts the chips in the middle. The opponent to her left ends up folding, so we're going heads up to the river here. 148 in the middle, and the 6 of spades peels off. So we do end up hitting our straight here. Still a bit concerning because there is a flush out there, but if our opponent had the flush, I would have expected to see her raise us on the turn. I'm gonna go for some value here with the bet sizing of $65. If she has the flush, she's gonna raise to more than this, and if she has a worse hand, hopefully she just calls. So she takes it over for a second, does eventually put in the call. I show our straight, and our opponent shows ace-4 of hearts. So she took a stab at it on the flop, improved to trips on the turn, and then we kept it small enough for her to call on the river. Not sure if I played this one right or if it was a bit dangerous. Let me know what you think in the comments. The next hand of interest brings us King Jack of diamonds in the hijack. It's been a little bit since our last hand. We've scooped a couple small pots, so we now have 660 in the middle. Anyhow, the action limped over to us, so I decided to bet $15 here. We got 2 callers, so we're gonna go 3 ways to this flop here with $49 in the middle. The board comes out King Jack Jack. We flop a full house, and to make things even better, another opponent does the betting for us. So our opponent bets $20. We have our second customer thinking it over for a little bit here, but she does eventually put in the call. So now, because 2 opponents have bet into this, I'm assuming one of these 2 players does have a jack. So I want to get a little bit more money into this pot, but I don't want to scare anybody else off just in case they're on some sort of Broadway draw. I end up raising to $40, which should make anybody really call with any hand that hit this board at all. Unfortunately, the original bettor ends up folding. The action gets back to our lovely friend Christina over there, and she doesn't seem to like this. I didn't realize that $20 was going to put people into such a tough spot. She does end up putting in the call, and now I'm kind of concerned that she doesn't have the jack or the king and might just have like ace queen or ace 10 or something of that nature. So when she checks the action over to us on this deuce of diamonds on the turn, I decided to down bet to $25 to keep her in here with any sort of draw she may have. Doesn't seem like she wanted to call the previous bet. Doesn't seem like she wants to call this one. And she's picking up her cards, looking at them, which usually means people are gonna fold. And she does. Oh man, I played that terribly. I probably should have just called the flop to let the original flop bettor continue betting on the turn, potentially keep Christina in there with her draw. She would have been a little bit more priced in. I already had a full house. I want her to hit a straight in this spot, but can't do anything about it now. Moving on to the next hand. About 2 hours go by. We ended up winning another PLO Bomb Pot by flopping a full house. There wasn't really too much of interest to see there, but now we get back to this hand. We look down at ace king offsuit in middle position with a little bit over $1,000 in our stack here. I decided to make it $20 to go, and we do end up getting 4 customers. So we go off to this flop 4 ways, and the board comes out 6-10 king with 2 diamonds. So we flop top pair, top kicker with the nut flush draw. Well, backdoor flush draw. We would have to get 2 diamonds in order to actually hit our flush. Anyhow, the under the gun player ends up betting $20. The opponent in the middle decides to fold. The action gets back to me, and this isn't quite enough. Our hand's a little too good, so we're gonna put in a raise here to $65, trying to get the player to our left out of here and isolate with the player at the other end of the table. She looks down at her hand, looks back at the board, decides that this is a good enough hand to call the raise, and she does put in just the call. The 5 of hearts comes on the turn, doesn't really change too much on this board. Our opponent checks it over to us, and now we are trying to decide how much we want to bet on this turn card. I decide that $80 sounds like a good amount. Looking at it now, $80 into 200 is not great at all. It'd be $80 for her to win 350, 360-ish. We're blocking some straight combos like ace queen and ace jack that would have a gut shot in this spot. So I think it's far more likely that our opponent might have 2 smaller diamonds, some sort of suited connectors like, 7-8 of diamonds, maybe 8-9 of diamonds or 9-10 of diamonds. Those diamonds are unaccounted for. I think she's putting us on the king and wants to get there on us. She ends up putting in the call. 9 of spades peels off on the river, which is not a diamond. Like we said, we put her on the flush draw, so I'm gonna go ahead and bet on this river card. Now the question is, how much are we going to bet here? If she missed her draw, she's not going to call anything, but I want to keep the price small enough that she might call with a hand like king queen or king jack. So I decide to bet out $120 here. Our opponent looks it over, thinks about it for a couple of seconds, and then does the unthinkable. She grabs a fat stack of chips and slides that bad boy over the line. Our opponent bet out $400. This line is extremely strong. Our opponent is basically saying that she has the nuts. And upon further review, I actually noticed that Queen Jack made a straight on this 9. She made a small bet on the flop, called the raise on the flop, called the turn, checked the river, and then raised to 400 for a slightly over pot size bet. This is textbook Queen Jack here. Absolutely phenomenal and beautiful way to play this into a slightly more aggressive opponent, which I can definitely beat at times. And this bet sizing is basically saying nuts or nothing. On the bright side, our bet sizing was really small on the turn and even on the river, so we're only going to lose the minimum here. Really sucks to be in these situations, but overall, we're playing positive EV poker. It's not worth it for us to be making these big hero calls in these spots where we're going to be dominated 9 times out of 10. So the only logical thing to do here is to put in the fold. And if she's bluffing, kudos to you. I'm not going to risk all of my profit for the day to F around and find out. All right, call. What? So obviously we deviated from our normal strategy. Not sure what made me get out of line this day and decide to put in the hero call when it was pretty obvious that we were beat. All we had was a bluff catcher and there was no reason for us to have to call with this hand here. Tried to be a hero, owned ourselves. This happens from time to time, but all we can do is try to move on and minimize it. Next hand of interest brings us ace-10 offsuit and the small blind with 432 in our stack. There is an open to $15 right behind us, so we go ahead and put in a call. We have 2 other players put in the call, so we're gonna go 4 ways to this flop here. We're playing for $60 and the board runs out 10 ace-5 with 2 spades. We're gonna go ahead and check here. We have top 2 pair, so we have a pretty strong hand, but with 4 people involved in the hand, I'm expecting a lot of people to bet their ace if they do have one. That ends up being the case. We have one opponent that bets $25 in late position. He was the pre-flop raiser, so this is a great card for his range. We go ahead and put in the call here. We could raise since we do have 2 pair, but I don't want to give away the strength of our hand and scare anybody off. And to my surprise, the opponent in the big blind ends up raising here, so he check raised this board and I'm pretty confused. I'm not quite sure what our opponent has here to go for a check raise. This usually indicates a set, but since we're holding ace-10, pocket aces, pocket 10s are far less likely. Also expect him to be the one to raise pre-flop with those hands, so pocket 5s is the only possible hand that he could be representing that's beating ours in this situation. Otherwise, it could just be an aggressive play with the flush draw, but based on the sizing that he used, it doesn't really seem like he wants us not to call. It's also possible that he has a smaller 2 pair with ace 5. Unfortunately, we're blocking a lot of the hands that we're beating, even the hands that we are losing to, we are blocking. So it's really hard to put our opponent on anything besides pocket 5s or the flush draw. The end of the gun player returns his cards to the dealer, and the action goes back over to the cutoff, who was the pre-flop aggressor and the original better on this flop. He doesn't seem too thrilled about the situation that he's in, so he ultimately does elect to muck here. All right, so the action gets back to me, and given the stuff we've already reviewed, I'm not putting the opponent on pocket aces or pocket 10s because of the pre-flop action, but also the flush draw. So we're losing to the 5s, we're beating ace 5, beating the flush draw, and we're chopping with ace 10. So there's really only 3 combos of pocket 5s that we're afraid of, and there's a lot more combinations of hands that we're ahead of. Given this, I'm going to do something that's a bit out of character here, and I'm going to go for a really big 3-bet trying to represent a set. I'm trying to give our opponent a very clear message. I'm letting him know that I have a monster, and if he calls this bet on the flop, we're going to play for the rest of it on the turn. I increased my initial $25 call to a whopping $250, inflating this pot to $415. At this point, our opponent leans forward. He does not like this whatsoever. He is now in an extremely difficult spot. It looks like he has a pretty big hand that he does not want to let go, but I'm basically saying this is set or nothing. Our opponent goes into the blender for a few minutes, and as he's trying to figure it out, ends up flipping his hand face over to try to pry some information out of us.
Oh, wow.
We got very fortunate that we decided to play that hand aggressively, otherwise we would have ended up just chopping the $50 that were in there from pre-flop, along with the $25 that the cutoff put in. A bit out of character for me, but this is literally the first big pot that we've played in 3.5 hours. We started playing extremely tight after we lost that big hand, making the bad call with the straight. So I cashed in on our table image there and tried to represent a big hand because of how tight we were playing tonight. Super stoked that it worked out and that our chip stack is heading in the right direction. The next hand of interest is a PLO Bomb Pot. We look down at ace, deuce, 5, 6. No matching suits, unfortunately, with 571 in our stack on the button. We go to this flop, obviously, 9 ways. The board runs out 6, 5 deuce with 2 spades. We have the small blind leading out for about $40. The big blind decides to cap it at $90, so there's now $230 in the pot. We have Joe at the end of the table who's putting his chips out to match the cap before the player behind him even folds. So obviously Joe's calling. The player after Joe also puts in the call, and then the player on the hijack also puts in the call, and then it gets over to the cutoff who folds, and then now at this point we have to call here. We only have top 2 pair, which is no good. Somebody obviously has 3-4, and there's going to be another player that's going to be on a spade draw as well. It's also possible somebody has a set, but we're blocking all 3 of them. So in this case, I'm hoping to hit either a 2, a 5, or a 6 on this board here. So we go to this run out, praying for the board to pair literally with any possible card. The turn comes a queen of clubs, and the river comes a 6 of hearts. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. We have 6s full of 5s. So as long as nobody has pocket queens here, we're sitting real pretty. So after a minute or so, everybody looks over their hand, making sure they're not missing something. They throw them in the middle, and the dealer slides the chips our way. We absolutely needed this to recover from that massive loss earlier in the session, so it looks like we might be back in the green. About 30 minutes go by and we look down at 2 hockey sticks under the gun with a little over $1,000 in our stack. Small pocket pairs are a great hand to try and hit a set with. A set for the new players is just when you hit trips on the flop and you're holding 2 of the cards in your hand, so it's a bit more disguised than when there are 2 of the same card on the board. Anyhow, there's somebody that bets $15, somebody raises to 30. I end up calling the 30. A couple other players end up calling the 30 as well. So we go multi-way to this flop with 126 in the middle. The board comes out Jack 4-8 rainbow. Like I mentioned earlier, we've been playing pretty tight, so I'm gonna go ahead and bet here, trying to represent the Jack. Everybody knows that ace Jack is a freaking hand I play way too much, so I'm hoping I'm gonna get some respect here. We instantly instantly get raised to $240 here. So obviously no respect for the jack whatsoever. Either our opponent is holding ace jack or he doesn't think that we would have let out of position with a jack. Either way, this is a very aggressive player. I know he's not afraid to get money in. I was debating whether or not I could bluff him off of this hand, but for some reason I actually believed him this time. He throws his hand in the middle, but later told me that he had pocket kings. What do you guys think? Do you believe him? Do you not? Do you think somebody would come over the top for that fat of an amount with kings when there's no draws available on the board? I'm not sure if I quite believe him, but it's okay. At this point in the night, it was really late. Last time I left past midnight, I was way too sleepy on the road, and it was a bit dangerous driving for 45 minutes when I was falling asleep while driving. So I decided to go ahead and rack up my chips and head to the cage.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 20, 40, 60.
All right, ladies and gents, that's all we have for the hands. Looking over our session history, that first one from 427 at Outlaws, we bought in for 400 and cashed out 380, so negative $20 there. Oh, I remember what happened. We went to go play and they lost power, so we were only there for a few hours and had to leave. Rather unfortunate, but it is what it is. And then if we look at the session from 5-4, we bought in for 1100 and cashed out 865. Yeah, that sucks. That session was a little rough. We bought in for a small amount, I think like 300, and ran it up to 1,000. Obviously lost that big hand against the straight. We were technically still up a couple $100, but I kept trying to catch her bluffing or, you know, taking my money back. That particular person that we lost it to wasn't able to take it back, ended up losing more, had to reload an additional probably $500 I bought. Yeah, $500, maybe $550. Trying to force some hands, wouldn't happen. Just started playing really tight. You guys saw we didn't play a hand for almost 3.5-4 hours. Ended up getting a couple big wins, but we were still down 200 and something bucks. I went to go update the graph for you guys, but it wasn't making a whole lot of sense. And then I realized there's a ton of sessions in here that weren't on the vlog because I wasn't recording. So we ended up going to Las Vegas for my buddy's bachelor party. So we went to South Point, profited over $1,000 playing 1-2. Then we went to South Point again the next day for a couple hours, made 182. Went to South Point again later that day. It looks like made 418 bucks. Lost $18 at South Point at 10 p.m. So wait, oh, we must have played a 1-2 session and then we switched to 2-3. That's what happened there. And then we came back at night, played for about an hour on almost in the 1-2, lost 18 bucks, played 2-3. Immediately after that, I logged them as different sessions, made 276. Looks like we left, played cash at the Golden Nugget the following day for about 5 hours, made 275. And then we had the $20 loss from 425. Then we jumped over to May 4th, and that was the outlaw session where we lost 235 bucks. So now with all that information accurately represented, if we check out the bankroll, and this is why I was confused, it looks like we are up $9,804. Absolutely insane. We are so close to 10K. It is freaking unreal. Anyhow, that's enough ranting for now and enough of a bankroll update. Thank you guys so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. You know what to do. Catch you next time.